Team for Monday, December 6th. Hi, I'm Aaron Schatz, the editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders. I'm being joined, as always, by Ian O'Connor from EdjSports to review all of yesterday's games in Week 13 of the NFL. We are live streaming right now on YouTube and Twitch, Twitter and Facebook, and in the little widget on the corner of footballoutsiders.com. Hi, everybody. If you're watching us, please be sure to ask comments in the chat. We'd love to talk about all the Week 13 games. And if you're on YouTube or Twitch, please like and subscribe to the show. We are on every weekday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern. Hello also to those of you listening after the fact on the Football Outsiders Podcast Network. Don't forget to become an FO Plus subscriber. FO Plus is now on sale just 99 cents a week for annual subscriptions. It's a limited time offer. Gets you all of our advanced stats, analysis, fantasy, football projections, and research data, plus betting information. Don't miss out on the limited time offer, 99 cents a week. You can access at footballoutsiders.com/subscribe or through the link in the description of this show. Ian, how was Week 13 for you?
It was good. A lot of action, had a busy weekend. So a busy day of football capped a busy weekend and had some really good games coming down to the finish in a couple of those. So really exciting. Both of my teams had bye this week, so I didn't really have a rooting interest necessarily, but it was a good weekend all in all.
FO Plus picks had a good week. My pick of the week was the Chargers, so that went out well. I started out good with my ESPN picks, but I was counting on a Ben Roethlisberger interception, and a couple of different times the Ravens dropped interceptions. I was very upset, like I didn't get my Ben Roethlisberger pick. But we can talk about that game later. The biggest, most exciting game of the week may have been Vikings versus Lions. Like, who would have expected the Lions to be involved in such a big game? But, of course, they got their first win of the season, and a game that came down to the final play with big-time calls and win probability swings.
Yeah, the Vikings find themselves in yet another close game, another heartbreaking loss. It seems like happens all the time for them. They can't escape it. I feel like they're the Chargers of the last, 3, 4, 5 years it's been, that they just cannot pull it out late. But, yeah, Dan Campbell continues to be really impressive in his first year. Kind of fell off a little bit the last few weeks as far as fourth down decision-making goes compared to the beginning of the season. But this week he ramped it back up, came in only 29th in our coach rankings. Part of that has to do with the Lions being so low in EPI, which is basically just the team performance on the field. He was 21st in CCI, fourth down decision-making coming in. So I mentioned he'd struggled of late, but I expect he's going to move up quite a bit in that CCI metric and likely pull him up a little bit overall as well. So started off first quarter, only 10 minutes left, had the fifth best fourth down decision of the week. 4th and 1 at his own 41. It's really come kind of common practice for him to go for these on his own 35, his own 40, 45, within those 10, 15 yards of midfield. When he goes for it there, I'm really not surprised anymore, which is really surprising to see, especially from a first-year coach. He and Brandon Staley both have been really good, where typically we see these coaches are a little bit more conservative. They don't want to do anything too crazy in their first year. But this one was a 4% increase in pre-snap win probability. Didn't convert it. Jared Goff up the middle got stopped, got no gain, turned it over, but still was a good call. And that kind of is foreshadowing a call, the biggest call of the weekend, really, that he was almost the GOAT in yet another loss for the Lions. 4th and 1. Only 4 minutes left in the game at their own 28, leading by 2. Chose to go for it. This is an 18.9% increase in pre-snap win probability. And kind of the reasoning behind why this is such a big play, we had someone on Twitter respond to us saying that seems a little big. But in this situation, if you punt the ball away, Minnesota gets the ball around 4 minutes left. They have to drive down for a field goal or a touchdown, a score. If they do, they're likely going to take up the whole clock, if not pretty much all of it. They still had 3 timeouts. Detroit's only got 1. So if they go for it, they get it. The game's not over. Minnesota's got 3 timeouts, but Detroit would have been up to like 65%. They didn't get it, but with Minnesota already being in field goal range, they get it at like the 21. The fumble kind of helped Detroit, I think, by getting Minnesota 7 yards closer. They were able to get into a first and goal situation, scored on 3rd and goal, leaving a minute 50 left for Detroit, which was obviously just enough time for them to get down the field for that game-winning touchdown. So just a great call from Campbell. I mean, I want to say that I'm not surprised, but even from him, I was a little surprised to see him go for it.
I want to just say this shows the difference between whether it's good to go for it and whether the play call that you had was correct. Mm-hmm. Because that Goff pass to do a play action rollout just seemed like a bad play call. And Jason Kabinda, the fullback, was looking around like he wasn't sure who he was supposed to block. And there ended up being an untouched rusher came in and took Goff down.
Yeah, and it looked like, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looked like it was a rollout to the right, and he had a guy in the flat that Minnesota played pretty well, I think. They had, a couple rushers in, and they had a guy on that receiver, if I remember that correctly. So the play call, you said, wasn't the best, but Minnesota, I think, played it fairly well for the most part, too. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, I would trust, like everyone called for, just run it, up the middle. You've got, Jared Goff on a sneak. He didn't get it earlier, but the 1 yard, or at least a better play call than that, where kind of everyone's on the same page. You mentioned the fullback kind of didn't take care of business like he should have there. But, yeah, ended up coming away with the win. They would go down the field and get the touchdown, obviously the most impactful play of the entire week. It comes in as the third most impactful play of the season, but the most impactful non-kicking play of the year. So that touchdown with 4 seconds left from the 11 was to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I had in loser league, so this did not help me at all.
Terrible.
Yeah, that was rough, but it was an 80.2% swing in win probability. The only two ahead of it, I mentioned, were 2 kicks. Both of these teams were involved in those games. It was the Justin Tucker game-winning field goal, the 66-yarder. The other one was Greg Joseph's miss against Arizona back in, I think it was week 2. So this one, the most impactful non-kicking play of the year. They were at 19.8% to win prior to the snap, or 1 in 5. In NFL, you only, or really any sport, you only get one shot at it. Detroit didn't need 5. They got 1 out of 1. So they were able to win it and come away with their first win. So really excited to see them get there, especially at home. Really awesome to see. And I think that's 2 years in a row, too. They've won the game at the Bud. Last year was against Atlanta, where Todd Gurley scored but tried not to score. And then Stafford hit Hawkinson, I think, for the game winner last year. So a couple big last-second wins for them the last couple of years.
Yeah, I guess when they win, it never happens. But when it does happen, they make it exciting. I will point out the Vikings were the better team in this game by the DVOA. They outgained the Lions 6.0 yards per play to 5.2, and they won the turnover battle 2-1. Normally, if you outgain the other team and win the turnover battle, you will win the game. And in fact, in my post-game win expectancy formula, based on the DVOA splits of this game, the Lions would only be expected to win 14% of the time. It's one of the most surprising wins of the year. And the Vikings are still 11th in DVOA on the season, despite the fact that this is not a good game, right? Like, even though they had the higher DVOA for the game, when you adjust for the fact that they played the Lions, like, both teams were negative. So, but the Vikings are still really high. But at this point, at 5-7, their season is pretty cooked, which is too bad. Because when I was in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, the Vikings were my $5 what the heck long shot bet, and I do not think I will be cashing that ticket.
Yeah, the loss pretty much locks up the NFC North, which was pretty much already locked up. But I think Green Bay's up 4 with 5 to go. One thing that was interesting from this game, too, just kind of a side note, like I said, not really an anomaly, but Minnesota was 0 for 3 on 2-point conversions, where typically, that's around a 50%, 47, 48. You would expect them to get at least one of those.
And if they went 0 for 3, that game is tied at the end. Yep. Well,
so
no, because Detroit would have the extra point. They would have kicked the extra point at the end if Minnesota had gotten to 2. So what happened with Detroit would have won by 1 with the extra point. Or knowing the way Minnesota and Detroit games go, Detroit would have missed the extra point and the game would have gone to overtime and ended in a tie.
Surprise! Yeah, that was interesting too. I was watching Red Zone, and Scott Hansen mentioned by the rule book they're actually supposed to have them kick that extra point. I think I don't know why they didn't.
Yeah, the reason
I know it didn't have an
why
impact on the game.
They didn't kick the extra point is the idea that it has no impact on the game, but because of the possibility that you could block the extra point and return it for a 2-point conversion to tie the game, they should have had them kick the extra point. Because there is the possibility of, however long, the possibility of Minnesota scoring 2 points on that play, they really should have kicked the extra point. But also, what Detroit then would have done is just come out and kneel on the ball.
Yep, 2-point.
Thus giving Minnesota absolutely no chance to block an extra point and run it back, thus making the play pointless. So I understand why they didn't bring them out just so Detroit could kneel on the ball and then the game would be over.
Yeah, and Washington did that just a few weeks ago against Tampa Bay, because there was the funny video where like no one on the team knew what was going on. Like, wait, why we're going for 2? Why are we going to kneel it? And Taylor Heineke said the same thing, so they can't run it back. I think at that point it was like an 11-point game or 10-point game, but it would have it wasn't as big of a deal in that game, but still, yeah, the very same thing would have happened for Detroit. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, but by this point, they've won the game. Detroit's won the game, so all they have to do is kneel on the ball, and the game's over. There's no reason for them to even try to kick an extra point. Let's talk about another hugely interesting, close game that went down to the final play, and that is the Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The interesting coaching matchup here between John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin. Harbaugh ranks 6th in the EdjSports coach rankings, and Tomlin is dead last.
Yeah, this one, a good big one of the biggest rivalries in the NFL. Ravens Steelers. Tomlin just kind of more, as Scott Brown put it on our podcast this morning, just on brand for Tomlin. He dropped to worst last week, surpassing Robert Saleh for 32nd in our coach rankings. Just has not been a good year for the Steelers really on the field or Tomlin as far as fourth down decision making. This was more of the same from Tomlin, 4th worst coaching call or fourth down decision of the week. 3rd quarter, 3:47 left. It's a 4th and 4 on the Baltimore 49. So across midfield, decides to punt, trailing by 7. It was a 3.2% error. And I'm pretty sure this is the one. It was only like a 24-yard punt. He punted it to the Baltimore 25-yard line. I think it was a fair catch. So got pretty much nothing out of it in this situation. So really just questionable decision there. Like, it is Pittsburgh. Both offenses really have struggled in this game, struggled to really move the ball or put up points. But with that Baltimore offense, as bad as they've been, not really as bad as they've been, I think they've been around kind of middle of the pack, not really up to their standards. But with them, it's, the big play can come at any time. Like, you can't just count on your defense is going to keep holding them. You've got to be aggressive, go for it, especially in that kind of, there's a low risk zone there around midfield. The field position game isn't really worth it in this situation. It wasn't. So just another bad fourth down call by Tomlin. Going down to the 4th quarter, we had some big win probability swings, so not really pertaining to fourth downs, but impactful plays. We had our 5th most impactful play of the week was what ended up being the game-winning touchdown from Roethlisberger to Deontay Johnson. Ended up with 2 touchdowns, dropped one at the end of the first half, but made up for it in the second half, coming away with the game winner here on really a great play. I think this was the one where Deontay started out left, came in hard like he was running a slant and stopped and just turned out to the left, and really was just an easy pitch and catch from Roethlisberger to Johnson to get in the end zone. It was a 23.5% increase in win probability. For the Steelers, they got the 2-point conversion to go up 7. Then we had what is probably the most controversial play or decision of the weekend, even more so than Dan Campbell's, because Baltimore lost. But the 2-point conversion. So Baltimore, only 12 seconds left. They scored 20-19, choose to go for 2. And this one is really difficult because you have it the way the model sees it. You also have the other things to take into account. Like Harbaugh said in his post-game press conference, I feel like they were out of cornerbacks. Marlon Humphrey had gotten hurt on Pittsburgh's last drive. So it's really a tough decision there. Unless you're a big underdog, going for it or taking the extra point is the better decision, at least by our model. As Baltimore, even with the worst offense or defense, it's still a better decision. If we look at them and say, all right, they've got the worst defense in the entire league on rush and pass, kicking the extra point because you have Justin Tucker, because they're still the better team. They're pregame favorites. They don't all of a sudden lose that pregame advantage.
The Ravens will be favored in overtime, both because they are the better team and because they have the best kicker in the history of the NFL.
Yeah, so it just was kind of interesting too. I would love to know, Scott made a good point this morning, that Harbaugh didn't really come out and say, it was a clear cut. Like, he wasn't very, full on like, yeah, it's the right decision. As he kind of talked about the injuries and stuff and not taking anything away from him. I'm really interested to know, we know Baltimore has a really good analytics group. We know some of the guys up there and they do a really good job, but I'm interested to know what they had that as with their numbers. If it was, they also had the extra point. Harbaugh said, you know what, I'm just going to go with my gut and go for it here.
It may have been that this is one of those decisions where the model has it so close that you go with your gut, because sometimes the analytics don't say whether to do either.
Right. And I wonder that. And like we've said, that the injury is kind of in him just not wanting to take the chance in overtime.
Right.
But so going back, this was the third most impactful play of the week. The loss dropped them, not getting it dropped them 37.1%. Ended up being the third biggest play of the week there. So.
Yeah. Todd Singer points out that the Colts ran out of healthy cornerbacks in the second half against Baltimore, so Harbaugh knows what that looks like, and it is not good.
That is true. That was a tough one for the Colts.
What surprised me is that there were a lot of analytically inclined people on Twitter who seemed to believe that the analytics favored going for two. But every model that I saw, not just the EdjSports model, but also the NFL Next Gen Stats model, favored kicking the extra point because of the fact that the Ravens would be favored in overtime and had the better kicker as well. So I understand not kicking the extra point. I understand the reason why Harbaugh did what he did. What I'm surprised at is that people thought Harbaugh made the analytics decision. I think Harbaugh made the gut decision. Yep. And I'm okay with that.
And it was the NFL. I know that I saw their tweets too. They said, typically it's around 47.9, 48% to convert what they said. But they missed it by inches. So they must have thought they had a play that they would convert more than 48% of the time.
And
that pass is a few more inches in.
Because Mark Andrews was open. Mark Andrews was open, and that TJ Watt got pressure, and Lamar Jackson just missed him by like just a tiny bit right off his fingertips. But he was open, and he waltzes into the end zone, and they win that game.
Yeah, and interestingly, too, we pulled up in the post-game press conference, Tomlin said, they are predictable. We know that they're heavily involved in analytics. So in that regard, they are predictable. Also basically saying, they're involved in analytics. That's what the analytics
a silly comment, because it's predictable. If they send the offense on the field, they're going for two. If they send the kicker out, they're kicking the extra point. Like, you don't need to predict which they're going to try. They're not running a fake to win the game. Like, if they send the offense out on the field, they're going for two. You don't need to predict anything.
And that's what I think it was Cameron Hayward I saw in a different article saying, he came off the field thinking, not expecting them to go for two. They called the timeout. I think it was Pittsburgh's last timeout to kind of catch their breath and get situated for the next play for that 2-point conversion. So they didn't really know what was going on at that point, it seemed like. But it's a tough break. Like you said, it was just inches. They missed that one.
It's a hugely important play because of the fact that Baltimore had been the number one seed in the AFC. That was celebration time for all of the other AFC contenders. And in the playoff odds I put up this morning, Baltimore is now listed with only a 7% chance of getting the number one seed. So instead of being the team that was in the lead for the number one seed, they're now behind the Patriots, Bills, Titans, and Chiefs, and tied with the Chargers in their odds of getting the number one seed. So it was a hugely important play.
Yeah, and it makes Cincinnati's loss earlier in the day even bigger, because that would have put Cincinnati into first place. They would have had the tiebreaker over Baltimore. So really big missed opportunity. We'll get to that game as well in our top fives, but a really big blow for them as well.
And we'll get also to updated coach rankings later this week. Coming Wednesday, you want to look for that at edjsports.com. That's edjsports.com, with Ian and Katie George doing updated coach rankings. Now let's look at the most impactful plays of the week. These are the plays that had the most impact on the game in terms of win probability, either positive or negative. And most of them we've covered already, just going through those first two games that we talked about. This seems to be last week's graphic.
Yeah, that looks like last week's.
All right, well, we can talk about the play, even though we don't have the graphic. We covered already the Steelers and Ravens are the number 5 and number 3 plays. The number 3 play being, I believe, the missed 2-point conversion, and the number 5 play being the touchdown by the Steelers that took the lead. And we covered already in the Lions and Vikings game the number 4 most impactful play of the week, which was Jared Goff's fumble on 4th and 1 late in the game. Let's talk about the number 2 most impactful play of the week, which was Bengals and Chargers.
Yep, just mentioned this one. The Bengals were down big early, able to stage a comeback, weren't able to get all the way back. Chargers were up 24-22. Bengals were driving. They had 2nd and 2 at the Chargers 34, already in field goal range to take the lead potentially early in the 4th quarter. Obviously looking for a touchdown. Joe Mixon just kind of starts to bounce it off to the right, loses the ball. It didn't really look to me like anyone got a hand on it to knock it out. Could be wrong on that. Only saw the play.
No, it looked like he just lost it.
Yeah, and Chargers picked it up and took it all the way back for the touchdown, and that essentially ended the comeback effort for the Bengals. Just a huge loss there, 37.5% decrease in win probability. Bengals were actually favored at that point, 54.3% to win. This drops them all the way down to 17%, and I think they ended up losing 41, ended up giving up another touchdown, field goal, 2-point conversion, I believe, losing this one pretty big. So we're really just a dagger for the Bengals there late in that game.
Yeah.
And then number 1, obviously, we talked about was the touchdown for the Lions that won the game, getting their first win.
The touchdown that screwed up our loser league teams.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the top 5 play calls of the week, the decisions that coaches made that had the most positive impact on the game in terms of win probability. Number 5, we already covered. It was the Lions in the first quarter. Let's talk about number 4, which is from last night's game. And I think this was a little controversial how much the Broncos went for it on 4th down last night. There was a lot of discussion on Twitter that they should have taken the points at the end of that 20-play drive. But, I think we saw by the end of the game, their offense, field goals weren't doing it.
Yeah, this was the first of 3 4th down conversions on there. This was the 20-play, 11-something minute drive. They didn't get any points, but not only they didn't get points, but a good point that was made this morning here, they kept the Chiefs' offense off the field for 11 minutes where they were unable to score. Like, you'd love to get points. Obviously, we're not saying that 11 minutes of game time, is worth not getting any points, but there's still a little bit of a positive that was had here. The first one was 4th and 1 at the Kansas City 46, was a 4.4% increase to go for it. They converted. 3 plays later, they've got 4th and 7 at the 42. This was about a 2% increase. Yet you've got that 4th and long, so it's obviously not going to be as big of a difference between going for it and kicking at 4th and 7, but they still made the correct call. And then Aaron, the one you were talking about, 4th and 2 from the 8, ended up being our 7th best 4th down call of the week. So not in the top 5, but just outside of it. Good for 3.6% increase. So Fangio just came in with a really aggressive mindset. He was kind of middle of the pack in terms of CCI coming into this game. But knew, field goals weren't going to win this game, to your point, the score at the end of the game.
As Mike Daniel pointed out, the problem is not going for it on 4th down so much. The problem is putting yourself in position where you have to go for it on 4th down so much. So the problem with the Broncos was not getting the 3rd downs.
Yeah. And we saw that from Detroit. Had a similar situation. I think it wasn't until their final drive
that they converted a 3rd down in that game. Absolutely horrendous. Only converted 2 3rd downs the whole game.
Yep, and they both came on that final drive, right? Or at least one of the 2 did. It was late in the game. I know that.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the number 3 coach's decision.
Yep, number 3, Robert Saleh. So comes in. He just moved up a spot in our coach rankings last week. This was 4th and goal at the 1. Almost midway through the second quarter, trailing by 2. Their kicker first game misses his 2 extra points in the NFL. But this was some good news for the Jets. They went for it. Was a 4.9% increase in pre-snap win probability. Able to get the touchdown. We saw him not a few weeks ago, early in the season against Tennessee in overtime. Had the 3rd and goal at the 1. Zach Wilson scrambled, lost some yards. Saleh said he would have gone for it 4th and goal at the 1. He got a chance to do that here, and just a really good call from him. I think a lot of coaches do that in this situation, but still to see him kick that or see him go for that, you really love to see there. And then number 2, Kyle Shanahan. This one is a pretty straightforward one. It's early in the game, about 4 minutes left in the first quarter. Tie game, 4th and 1 at the Seattle 45. Chose to go for it. It was a 5.2% increase pre-snap win probability. Same game. It's not on our top 5s. You mentioned number 1 we talked about was Dan Campbell. But this same game we saw Pete Carroll be aggressive, ended up getting a
how rare is that?
Yeah, I tweeted out for us saying, it's not often that you hear Gutsy calling Pete Carroll in the same sentence. But a lot of times we prefer just to put the offense on the field and go for it. But I think him playing the long game, helped out where no one expected him to run anything like that.
Talk about the fake punt, yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about the top 5 worst play calls, and remind everybody who's watching live on the live stream to please like and subscribe to our videos and channels on YouTube and Twitch. And please, we want to see your comments and questions. We want to hear from you. Talk about Week 13, what you want to know about Week 13. Let's talk about the decisions coaches made with the most negative impact on win probability. And these are mostly we have not gone through these already.
Yeah, number 5, Joe Judge. No, he's not new to this list. Really no surprise here. He probably would have been on here more had they had Daniel Jones at quarterback, because we know even with Daniel Jones, he's not going for it on some of these 4th downs. This one was a 4th and 2 at the Miami 46. 5 minutes left in the third, down by 4. Offense obviously struggling. I mean, there's really no excuse for this. I mean, it ended up being a touchback, so you only gained 26 yards of field position. Really, I don't think is worth the 2.6 they gave up by choosing to punt instead of going for it here. And, I mean, Judge, it's 2 years in a row now. He has these moments where he goes for it every once in a while, but I feel like 9 times out of 10, it's for some reason he just refuses to do it. Number 4, again, we covered Mike Tomlin here. 4th and 4 at the Baltimore 39. This was the one I mentioned he punted. The punt ended up only being 25 yards to the Baltimore 24. The pre-snap win probability decrease was 3.2%. Number 3 and number 2 are very similar to that Steelers one. They're both the Raiders, down 7. One in the first quarter, one in the second quarter. They're 3.3 and 3.4% errors. So pretty similar. Yeah. But it's a 4th and 5 at the Washington 48, 4th and 4 at the Vegas 48. Both decisions, we get this every week, right around that midfield area. Just the risk isn't as high, especially early in the game. And with a team, Derek Carr, the Raiders have a decent offense. They're not one of the best, but he's a decent enough quarterback that they should be going for this in this situation.
The biggest difference between them is that in one of them, Rich Bisaccia is wearing a hat, and in the other one, he's not wearing a hat.
Yeah, I guess the hat makes it a little bit worse. He can't think as well with that hat on, so it gives him a 3.4% error there for number 2. The number 1 is on the flip side, Ron Rivera. This is one that's
this is going to be a controversial statement, certainly.
Absolutely, and I understand it. This was one that even it's a 6.5. We saw one like this either last week or 2-3 weeks ago. That was like a 13% error. That was a very similar situation, and this one's a little. I mean, 40 seconds is still a lot of time, but this one's
40 seconds is a lot of time. 49 is a long field goal, but indoors, it's not that long. It's not like a 58 or something.
Right.
You should be able to hit a 49 indoors. So I think if I was in Rivera's place, I probably would have made the same decision.
I think so too. And interestingly on this one, we looked at the numbers. I was kind of just figuring out what it would take, how important the time is there. Once you get down to 31 seconds is when it's kind of the break-even point. The field goal and the go are pretty similar. From that point on, the field goal is the optimal decision. But then something else we looked at that came after this on the kickoff was very important. It might not seem like much, but I think it was Brian Johnson kicked it, and it was just short to about the 1 yard line where Las Vegas had to return the kick. Took 6 seconds off the clock. That 6 seconds was worth about 4% in win probability, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when they're down, I think they were in like the 30s at that point. The Raiders were. That's worth quite a bit of equity there that late in the game. And we saw though the Raiders Carr throws a bomb on first down that could have been pass interference. Zay Jones almost made the catch. So really,
yes. He got tugged on the jersey, and there's definitely some refs who would have called that pass interference. He got tugged on the jersey.
Yeah. So really, Rivera's decision, we both said we probably would have made the same decision, but almost, ended up hurting them in the end with the Raiders almost getting down there on that first play and field goal range. But at the same time, if he goes for that and doesn't get it, you're dealing with a whole lot more. You're absolutely roasted for the rest of the season probably for not taking the chance at the field goal. But still, 6.5, not a huge error. It is a large, obviously the biggest of the week. But looking at those other decisions, the next biggest is less than 3.5%. We still are confident in those numbers, obviously, but the 6.5, isn't as much as some as we've seen in these situations where you've got a minute and a half left or a minute and 40.
Remember, if you miss the field goal, they'll blame the kicker. If you fail on the 4th and 1 go, they'll blame the coach.
Absolutely.
Todd Singer says, I saw a note on Twitter about Houston and Atlanta having historically poor run offenses. Will that be featured in the DVOA write-up this week? Yeah, let me look into that. We'll see. I don't know yet what I'm going to write up because tonight's game is so important, which brings us to talking about tonight's game, which is so important. The number 2 team in DVOA versus the number 3 team in DVOA. So I don't know what I'm going to write about tomorrow yet because tonight's game probably determines who's number 1 going forward. Patriots playing remarkably well of late with their last 3 games, all over 70% DVOA. To tell you how high that is, there was not a single game in Week 13 that was as good as the last 3 Patriots games. Wow. It is the line is, I believe, has been Bills 2.5 and Bills 3, and it's gone back and forth between 2.5 and 3.
Yeah, this is with the Bills. You mentioned number 2 and number 3 teams in overall DVOA. I know the Bills lost Tre'Davious White, but still the top 2 defenses in DVOA. Is that right?
Yep.
So 2 good defenses, and that comes into play. I'll start with the total. You say it's not often you see a Bills game with a total at 41 points. So really low, 2 good defenses, the way that you I think people are expecting Belichick to kind of try and control the game with Mac Jones, but also that Bills
and the weather will be bad.
Oh, the weather as well playing a factor. So yeah, we've got some home field advantage built in, obviously for Buffalo. We have in our model. So this is closer to a pick 'em. We've got it at Buffalo -1. So really close to that 2.5. There's not a whole lot of value to be had there. The over/under I mentioned the total's at 41. We've got it at 43. That Bills team, the offense really hasn't lived up to expectations. And Buffalo, as you know, Aaron, DVOA and variance is the last most inconsistent team
of all time
so far. Of all time.
The most inconsistent team of all time going all the way back to 1983. There has never been a team as inconsistent over the first 12 weeks of the season as the Buffalo Bills this year.
It definitely seems that way too. They go from, winning a big game against Kansas City, who wasn't as good at that point as people kind of thought they were, but then they turn around. I don't know if it was a week later, a couple of weeks later, and lose to Jacksonville. They lost to Tennessee. You never know what you're going to get from them, but still 2 really good defenses come into this one. Not a lot of value to be had. The market is pretty split as well. 52%. Oh, this has changed since this morning, since just about an hour or so ago. 52% of the bets are on Buffalo. This morning, that was at 51% in turn. Oh, sorry, it is 51% New England. 59% of the money's on Buffalo. So a little bit more of the money on Buffalo, but still pretty close both ways. Just really should be a really good game. Should be a close game. Really hard to pick a side either way. If anything, there's very, very slight value on New England against the spread and the over in this one.
Yeah, the FO picks, which I think are discounting home field advantage more than the EdjSports picks, have the Patriots favored by 1. And Todd Singer is right that the weather game does seem to favor the Patriots' style of play. The Bills are kind of a finesse team. Their defensive line is primarily about pass rushing. Their offense is primarily about passing, a lot of passing downfield, which should have problems in the wind, you would think, although you would also think Josh Allen's arm would be able to cut through the wind better than Mac Jones's arm. I mean, the most likely result is that these 2 teams split the 2 games that they have to play this year. Right?
The most weather
whoever wins tonight will lose 3 weeks from now. But you'd rather win the first one and be able to go out and play the second one than to lose the first one. So I think this is a very, very close This is a very, very close game.
Absolutely. Yeah, but the weather kind of favoring New England. It seems similar to that game against Tampa Bay earlier in the year, where weather was a factor. It was a close game. You've got the Bucs team that throws the ball a lot and really well, but good defenses. So
I will note that Scott's fantasy projections suggest that both quarterbacks will go over in yardage, despite the fact that he accounts for the weather. Mac Jones's number is at 198.5, and we suggest he'll go over that 66% of the time. And Allen is at 233.5, and we suggest he'll go over that 68% of the time. So it might be scary to do an over on quarterback passing yards when the weather and the wind is going to be bad, but Scott does account for that. So it's interesting that we point towards overs on both of the passing yards props.
Yep, nearly looks like 2/3 and one almost 2/3 of the time, and the other one just over 2/3. So
yeah. All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us in today's show. Thank Ian, of course, for joining me every Monday. Don't forget all of our live streams, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, every day, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you to Todd Singer for comments throughout the show. Thank you to Sean MC. Merry Christmas to you, too, a little early. He wished Merry Christmas to everyone at the Football Outsiders crew.
Only 2 weeks, though. Well, two weeks in like 3 or 4 days. Who's counting now?
But you missed Hanukkah. It ended last night.
Yep.
I guess it's still going during the day today. So happy Hanukkah to all of you. Tomorrow will be Scott Spratt and Derek Klassen talking fantasy football. Wednesday, I believe, is Brian Knowles with me and Tanya doing Ask Me Anything. Please subscribe to our show, whatever platform you use. Please give a 5-star review. They're very helpful for us to grow. And as I've mentioned before, FO Plus is now on sale, 99 cents a week for an annual subscription. All of our stats, splits, analysis, fantasy football research data, and betting information. Go to footballoutsiders.com/subscribe. Thank you, Ian. Looking forward to a big game tonight. This Monday night games don't get much better than what we're going to get tonight. So
should be a good one. Thanks for having me.
And join Scott Spratt tomorrow for Fantasy Talk, 1 p.m. Eastern. Bye, everybody.